Police in Hong Kong have rejected an application for an annual candlelight vigil, marking this week's anniversary of the 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown. This would mark the first time in 30 years that it will not be held. The news follows last week's approval of a new national security law for Hong Kong. Many in Hong Kong are rushing to apply for passports, promising them overseas British nationality, days after Britain said it is exploring options that may allow them to eventually seek citizenship. Joining me now on Skype from Hong Kong is Wilson Leung, a lawyer and pro-democracy activist. Wilson, welcome back to the show. So good to see you. First off, I want to get your reaction to today's announcement banning the annual candlelight vigil marking the anniversary of Tiananmen Square.
Well, I think it's a terrible announcement. I mean, this event is one of the trademark events in the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement. Hundreds of thousands of people every year celebrate remember the Tiananmen tragedy. But this is the first year since the Chinese handover that it's been banned. And unfortunately, what's even worse is with the new national security law being imposed by Beijing, it may very well be the last we ever see of this vigil.
I know police are saying they're banning this because it would violate social distancing rules. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it seems we've seen a pattern of these social distancing rules being selectively enforced against pro-democracy protesters, whereas they take a more lenient attitude towards the pro-Beijing protests and also towards entertainment districts. Also, actually, the COVID-19 problem in Hong Kong, we're having single-digit infections, very low rates, and it's not difficult to suspect that the regulations are being used and put in place to suppress the pro-democracy protests.
Wilson, you mentioned the new national security law briefly. Can you talk a little bit more about that and explain that to us?
What's happening is that Beijing has decided to draft a new so-called national security law for Hong Kong and impose it on Hong Kong. And these are going to criminalize vague concepts such as subversion, sedition, foreign interference, and also terrorism. Now, these concepts are all well and fine, but the problem is who's drafting them and what will they contain. And we've seen that in China itself, these very laws are used to suppress activists and to suppress human rights. So, for example, subversion was the charge used against Nobel Prize Peace Laureate Liu Xiaobo.
And I know that you've been following these pro-democracy efforts in Hong Kong. What's the impact this is already having on the pro-democracy movement and the protests that we've seen?
It's a devastating impact. Already, the pro-democracy groups in Hong Kong are self-censoring themselves in anticipation of the law, which may or may not be retrospective. So we've seen them, for example, afraid to link up with international human rights organizations, afraid to speak to international media, and also being restricted in what they say publicly. Many people have shut their Facebook pages or are changing to anonymous names so as not to fall foul of the new law.
Wilson, we don't have much time left, but I really want to ask you this last question if we can get it in. We've seen the video of people preparing to leave Hong Kong. Tell us, what is the mood like there?
I think there's certainly a lot of people thinking that this is the end of Hong Kong as a semi-free city, and it's time to leave. We've seen searches for immigration agencies increase 20-fold. And there's a lot of discussion of assets and people being moved out of Hong Kong.
Wilson, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.